Okay, we're jumping right into a huge breaking story. We're talking about a massive, sudden escalation in the Middle East. Open warfare has just erupted between Iran, Israel, and the United States. This is a big deal because it ends decades of what's been called a shadow conflict, and it's throwing the entire region into crisis.
So, how did this all kick off? Well, it was incredibly dramatic. On February 28, 2026, air raid sirens just started wailing all across Israel. You can imagine the scene, people scrambling for shelter, their phones lighting up with alerts warning that a missile attack was coming, and coming fast.
And confirmation came almost right away. The Israel Defense Forces put out this statement, and I'll read it for you. A short while ago, the IDF identified missiles launched from Iran toward Israel. Defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat. And that was it. This wasn't a proxy attack. This was the real thing. A direct, state-on-state attack was happening.
Now this is a turning point. For decades, these countries have been fighting a shadow war. A conflict fought with cyber attacks, assassinations, proxy forces, all under the table. But this was different. This was the day that shadow war ended and an open one began.
So that brings us to the biggest question on everyone's mind right now. Why? What on earth would trigger such a direct attack from Tehran?
Well, the sequence of events from that day is absolutely critical to understand. You can see from the timeline here, Iran's missile launch, it wasn't the first move. It was actually a retaliation. Just hours before, the US and Israel had launched their own massive, coordinated preemptive attack on Iran. And Iran's leadership immediately promised what they called a crushing response.
So, what exactly was this first attack? It was a joint military operation with two different code names. Israel called it Operation Lion's Roar, and for the US, it was Operation Epic Fury. The operation hit targets all across Iran. We're talking military bases, political headquarters, and key nuclear sites.
And the goals, they were made crystal clear. President Donald Trump announced the operation with this statement, saying the objective was to, and I'm quoting here, destroy Iran's missile and military capabilities, prevent it from obtaining nuclear weapons, and ultimately topple the regime. I mean, that last part, topple the regime. That's a direct call for overthrowing Iran's government. No ambiguity there.
But of course, an attack on this scale doesn't just happen out of the blue. To really get how we got to this point, we've got to rewind and look at the timeline of how tensions were boiling over.
The first couple months of 2026 were just a powder keg waiting to blow. In mid-January, President Trump voiced his support for anti-government protesters in Iran. 10 days later, he announces a U.S. armada is steaming toward the region. Then, in mid-February, the last round of nuclear talks in Geneva totally collapses. And then, the final straw, really. On February 19th, Trump gives Iran a hard 10-day deadline. It was pretty clear diplomacy was dead.
So you end up with two completely different stories, two clashing justifications for war. On one side, the US and Israel said their goal was to disarm Iran and support the Iranian people. But on the other side, Iran framed its actions as purely defensive, a necessary response to protect its sovereignty from foreign attack. And as you'd expect, a conflict this big didn't stay between just 2 or 3 countries. Nope. It immediately spilled across the entire region, pulling in other nations and threatening to light a much, much bigger fire. And this just shows you how wide Iran's response really was. They didn't just fire missiles at Israel. They also targeted key US military hubs all across the Persian Gulf. We're talking bases in Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Kuwait. They went after everything. And the risk of this getting even worse was immediate. Israel went on high alert along its northern border because they were deeply concerned that Hezbollah, Iran's very powerful ally in Lebanon, was about to open up a whole new front in this war. And just like that, this wasn't just a regional problem anymore. This conflict sent immediate and pretty severe shockwaves across the whole planet, affecting pretty much everyone.
Yeah, this table gives you a quick snapshot of the chaos. For aviation, airspace over Iran, Iraq, and Israel was basically shut down, forcing major airlines to cancel everything. In telecom, Iran itself went dark with a near-total internet blackout, and there were reports of GPS signals being jammed all over the region. And then there's energy, which is a whole other level of problem.
Because this is what's at stake. 21 million. That's how many barrels of oil pass through the Straits of Hormuz every single day. And with a major war now raging right on its shores, that critical artery for the global economy was suddenly at risk of being completely cut off.
And let's just look a little closer at that information war. Inside Iran, the country was almost entirely disconnected from the world. Look at this chart. A staggering 97% of the country was pushed offline. That just isolates millions of people and creates a total information vacuum at the worst possible time.
So, the big question is, where does this go from here? With open warfare now the reality, experts are looking at 3 potential and very different futures for the region.
All right, scenario 1 is what's being called a regime transition. The idea is that the combination of military strikes from the outside and protests on the inside could cause the government to collapse. Scenario 2, a protracted regional war. This is where the Iranian regime survives this first wave and just digs in for a long, grinding war of attrition, using all its allies to attack US and Israeli interests. And then there's the third one, which is maybe the most worrying of all, an accelerated nuclear program. Basically, Iran's leaders could decide that the only way to guarantee they'll never be attacked like this again is to get a nuclear bomb, and they rush to build one in secret. And really, that's the question that's hanging over everything right now. The long shadow war is officially over. Diplomacy is in pieces, and what's left is an open shooting war with consequences that are going to shape global security for years, maybe decades to come. So which of these paths will the Middle East now follow? The whole world is watching to find out. We'll continue to track this developing situation, so be sure to stay informed.